Good morning. Welcome to the Internet Archive. So glad you're all here this morning. So, I'm practicing something right now that's critically important for the success of this event over the next 2 days. And that is, I am speaking directly into the microphone. All right? We're gonna be emphasizing that more than once. And it's a sign that just that also the second thing is, Caitlin down here is sending me signals. And she said mic, so I need to speak into the mic. There we go. There's also a clock right down here, and it's counting down the time, although it hasn't started yet, so it means I can talk. Yeah, okay. 10, okay. So there's two reasons why it's important to speak into the microphone. The first reason is because the mic doesn't pick things up when I go like that. The second reason is, turn behind you, please, and look at those computers. So those computers are part of the Internet Archive. And they're running, and people are using them right now, and all those little blue lights are flashing. There's people reading or writing to them. So we're a nonprofit. We're really, really frugal. And one of the ways we save money is we don't use air conditioning. The windows are open. And so it's also a little noisy because the fans are blowing back there. Okay, so how did I do so far? Could you hear me? Excellent, great. So once again, welcome here. So pleased to be hosting the Dodging the Memory Hole Conference, number 5 in the series here at the Internet Archive. Jefferson Bailey, a colleague of mine here, and I attended last year's conference at UCLA. It was my first. I'm relatively new to the web archiving world, and it was fantastic. I learned a lot. I met some great people, and I immediately thought to myself, these are the kind of people that I want to bring home. And so I raised my hand and I said, hey, Ed, where are you going to have this next time? And he said, I don't know. So anyway, so glad that we were able to host you here today, and looking forward to a lot of sharing at a personal and a professional level today and tomorrow. So let me just get a few logistical issues out of the way. First of all, you might be asking yourself, what's this Wayback Machine thing going on, or this behind me here? Every October, we have an event. It's our annual October event. It's basically Brewster's way of getting us to work toward a deadline. And the teams all work really hard to get a lot of things done so that we can stand up here and we can say, we did some stuff. And this place was full this October 11th, with more than 800 people. And we had a theme, and the theme was the 20th century Wayback Machine. And some creative person on our team, Alexis Rossi, she made an actual working Wayback Machine. Actually, had this been turned on, there'd be dry ice effects and sound and lights and all the rest of that, but we're not going to do that today. Anyway, so that's what that is going on. If anyone feels so inclined, there's photo opportunities. You could, in fact, come behind and come out, and you can set that up and put it on Facebook, etc. So that's the Wayback Machine. Second most important thing, bathrooms. Outside of this door here, down the hall, this bathroom. Downstairs on either side of the hall, there are bathrooms. And at lunch, we're going to be going down into the Sunday school. Yes, this used to be a church of Christian Scientists. We left almost everything the same as when we got it, as you see as you roam throughout the building. And downstairs, we have bathrooms as well in the Sunday school. If you have any questions, just find me. Wi-Fi. It's Internet Archive is the Wi-Fi, and there's no password. So have at it. The one thing that we do ask is that you not create hotspots. It can kind of cause some interference for some people. Let's see, a couple more things. Tonight, we have a little change in the schedule. So at about 6 o'clock, we thought we would show a movie here. In honor of the fact that Daniel Ellsberg will be speaking tomorrow morning at 10:25, we thought it would be apropos to show the movie The Most Dangerous Man in America. So that'll be here tonight about 6 o'clock. You can invite people to come to it, and we'll see how it goes, and everyone's invited. Let's see. Then one other thing, at about 4 o'clock this afternoon, Katie Hafner, who's a working journalist, working right now on a story with the New York Times, is going to zoom in here and zoom out, and she's going to give us an update on a story she's working on tomorrow. Well, I'll confirm this. Regardless, today or tomorrow, she's going to come in here and she's going to give us a highlight of some work that she's doing using the Wayback Machine on a breaking story. So we'll give a little more information about that as it comes up. That's probably about it. If you have any questions, you want any help for anything, just try to find me, and I'll do the best that I can. What I want to do now is introduce the person who put this together, the man who owns the program for this and invited you all to come and selected the various speakers, and has been the heart and soul and the driving force behind this conference for the last many years, Ed McCain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Let me adjust this microphone thing so that I follow protocol. There we go. I think that's better. Good morning. Welcome to Dodging the Memory Hole 2017 at the Internet Archive. I've been waiting for a while to say that, and it's really great to be here. For those of you who are not acquainted with it, Dodging the Memory Hole is first and foremost a community built around the need to preserve born digital news. It's part of the outreach agenda of the Journalism Digital News Archive, or JDNA, based at the University of Missouri Libraries and the Donald W. Reynolds Journalism Institute, both on the MU campus in Columbia, Missouri. So this is, as Mark said, this is actually our 5th event in the Dodging the Memory Hole series. So far, we have gathered in Columbia, Missouri, the first one, Charlotte, North Carolina, our second. We made a trip to Washington, D.C. as part of the Beyond NDMP group. We went just down the road last year at UCLA. And now we're most grateful to be here in San Francisco at one of the epicenters of digital preservation, the Internet Archive. It's a wonderful venue, I think you'll agree. We're grateful for the opportunity to gather here. Let me give a huge thanks to Brewster Kale, Mark Graham, and everyone. We have a lot of volunteers and help from the Internet Archive that are helping us run this and host us for the next 2 days. Thank you so much. The Internet Archive and the work it represents are the perfect place for this particular iteration of Dodging the Memory Hole, which is focused on providing long-term access to online news. There are a host of challenges. I think we'll hear about them as we proceed the next few days, but there are many challenges presented to those of us who wish to capture that first rough draft of history as it appears in HTML and other online formats. It is our hope that by building a strong network comprised of stakeholders from many sectors, including journalists, technologists, librarians, and archivists, lawyers, scholars, and concerned citizens, we can find effective solutions to preserving online news for the long term. So thank you all for joining us today. I want to point out, if you will be tweeting, if you're using the social media, please include our hashtag DTMH2017 in your posts. We appreciate that. Moving right along, I want to go to introduce our keynote speaker. I have the privilege of introducing someone who modestly calls himself a digital librarian, which he undoubtedly is, but behind that title and this man is a noble and ambitious quest. That is, to provide universal access to all knowledge. Brewster Kale grew up in Scarsdale, New York, about 30 miles north of New York City. He graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he studied artificial intelligence. Shortly after graduating from MIT, Brewster assumed the role of lead engineer for the company Thinking Machines. While at Thinking Machines, he and others developed the Wide Area Information Server System, WAIS for short, which was the first internet publishing system, and that was in 1989. Pretty amazing. A few years later, in 1996, he co-founded Alexa Internet, a company that provides web traffic data and analytics. The name Alexa was chosen as an homage to the ancient Library of Alexandria, the largest store of knowledge in the ancient world, and is reflective of the Internet's potential to serve the same purpose in today's world. At the same time as he started Alexa, Brewster founded the Internet Archive. Public access to the archive of the World Wide Web arrived in 2001 with the introduction of the Wayback Machine. As a result of his vision, the public currently has access to the history of over 308 billion web pages. Today, the Internet Archive works with more than 400 library and university partners, preserving some 20 petabytes of data, including texts, audio, still, and moving images and software. Other projects include the Archivit web archiving service, a vast and varied media archive, and the Open Library site. Brewster's accomplishments have been widely recognized. Frankly, there are too many to mention here, but here's a partial list, some highlights. He's a member of the Internet Hall of Fame, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, member of the National Science Foundation Advisory Committee for Cyber Infrastructure, serves on the boards for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Public Knowledge, Internet Memory, and the Television Archive. His awards include the Paul Evan Peters Award from the Coalition of Networked Information, Robert B. Downs Intellectual Freedom Award from the University of Illinois, the Zola Horn Intellectual Freedom Award, and the Software and Information Industry of America Peter Jackson Award. We are grateful to Brewster Kahle and his staff for hosting us at this beautiful venue today at the headquarters of the Internet Archive. I'm pleased that he accepted our invitation to provide the keynote address for Dodging the Memory Hole 2017. The title of his talk is appropriately Universal Access to All Knowledge. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. Hopefully this is a really useful and interesting couple of days. It certainly will be for us. What I really want from you guys is for you guys to not be nice, not be polite, and go and say, this is what you really want from us. So we can basically go and figure out how we can go and help our communities and journalism, especially right now. We've now got a period where people have shifted to looking to their screens for answering questions. Yet, we don't have the infrastructure behind that yet. Often the best information is not there, or if it's there, you can't find it, or if it's there, it's not there tomorrow. So we have an opportunity. We have people looking for answers. It's fantastic. Now let's go and do the rest of it. What I thought I'd do is exactly as said, is give a broader view of what the Internet Archive is doing, but with a focus on the journalism piece. You're going to hear much more about the Wayback Machine and how that's going and archiving the news and the television archive. But the idea of make that go away. The television archive and the Wayback Machine and collecting news online. But I thought I'd try to give a broader idea of some of the challenges we're trying to do and how we might be able to work together. The goal of the internet that I signed on to was to try to provide universal access to all knowledge. Could we build the Library of Alexandria version 2? Could we make it so that all the published works of humankind could be available to anybody curious enough to want to have access to it? And the answer is technologically, absolutely. but there's a lot of institutional resistance to this and just non-adjustment. So we're living in a time that it could have already been done, but we need the mechanisms to get through some of the changes, whether it's in sort of how business models are done, what expectations are, and what is the new opportunities because of this online. Who are we? Here's where you are. It's the Internet Archive. We're a nonprofit library, 501c3. We're not part of a university or a government, but lots of universities and governments help fund us through the services that we do. We see ourselves in the tradition of libraries. I love what people carve in stone. Carved above the door of the Boston Public Library is free to all. I think that libraries play a special role, in many ways like journalism. They're allowed to sort of cross over. They're allowed to go and make permanent other people's stuff. They're allowed to go and pick and choose and highlight things in a special way because we play a special role. Now, almost a year ago, when we woke up to having a different president than we thought we would, I asked the television archive group here to build me a clip reel. What has this man said about freedom of the press and about the internet? And because we'd been recording all television, especially television news, Roger was able to do that. He put it together, and out of all these campaign speeches, 60 Minutes interviews, it was extremely consistent. It was very hostile to the press, and even talks of shutting parts of the internet down. So this is, it was like, we have some role to play here that's much more access-oriented. What I'd like you to do is try to look at this breadth that I'm going to portray, and then try to think of what could journalists use to support the journalism enterprise, and not just for journalists, but also for readers of journalism. So one thing we thought was we need to go and put everything published, all the 20th century that might be copyrighted, and make it easily accessible to Wikipedians and journalists to be able to go and cite good published materials. A lot of materials that aren't available yet. How do we do that? And we're taking much more bold steps now, and I'll outline some of those to try to make it so that there's the underlying materials as well. Let's take books. I'm going to go books, music, video, web pages, and try to argue that universal access to all knowledge is doable. And then I'm hoping that you put in your minds, how can it be useful to you? If we want all books, how big is it? The Library of Congress is about 28 million books. It's the largest print library by far. A book is about a megabyte. So 28 million megabytes, if you had it in Microsoft Word, it is 28 terabytes. 28 terabytes is 4 hard drives that you can buy for less than a month's rent. It's about 2 inches at the bottom of one of those columns of servers. So you could have all of the words of the Library of Congress without breaking a sweat. Of course, digitizing it is another matter, and if you had it in images of pages, it would be higher. But to just give you kind of an idea, it's completely doable. People are getting used to having information online, and so the idea of online books is no longer, over my dead body. It's just kind of assumed. You can print them back out again. We made a bookmobile, download, print, and bind, and give out books. Costs $1 a book to download, print, and bind a book. So that means you can lend a book, you can give out a book cheaper than actually the administrative cost of lending a book for most libraries. But really, screens are where they're coming around, and there's now a whole variety of them. My favorite is the little one in the bottom right, which is a talking machine. So it's for the blind and dyslexic. You can download, and it will read it to you. So by going and digitizing these materials, we also get added benefits beyond preservation and normal access. We get distance, we get reformatting, we get a bunch of other hopeful uses of these materials. How do you do it? Well, we build book scanners, and we're scanning at about 1,000 books every day, getting awesome materials from rare book collections. This is from the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing, where they're digitizing books with us. But we wanted to go beyond that and try to get a complete collections. We've been really feeling locked by most libraries aren't going beyond 1923 because of copyright. And the idea that our digital libraries can only have out-of-copyright materials or currently licensed materials is not going to be making a very useful library. So we have to be able to move through it, but a lot of people aren't ready for it. So we've been looking for complete collections, and we've been trying these different things. So we asked some different groups, how about everything published in your language? And the Greeks were kind of busy imploding, the Icelandic folks, anyway, but the Balinese said yes. And so we said, okay, let's digitize everything in Balinese. And it turns out they write on palm leaf manuscripts. They do palm leaf manuscripts. So we photographed all of their it's an island of 3 million people. And there's these beautiful palm leaves. And we said, okay, after we did that, how do you read them? And they said, well, we don't, the priests know how to read them, but we don't often know the scripts. And sometimes they're rendered. And we said, okay, why don't we record priests reading them? And they said, well, it's not only that. Sometimes it's also shadow puppet plays. So it's kind of fun. So we started putting online the shadow puppet plays that are the palm leaves, or the dances that these things are actually about. I have the best job in the world, but I think it's kind of cool that the first people to go completely online in the open are the Balinese. Yay! Wouldn't you think it would be, the United States? Or it's like, no. I guess we have other things to do. So that we have scanning centers all over the world. We do about 1,000 books every day. It's inexpensive. If you have things that you would like to be able to search, put them to a local scanning center. If it's only 100 books or something like that, we'll do it for free. Just get it on. Let's get this going. We have about 3 million books. There's Google Books Project, which is very large, much larger than this, about 10 times larger than what we've got. But it's locked up. It was used to basically feed their search engines, and that's about it. But we have a much more open mandate, and so we're moving through this. Now, how do we get past the 1923 problem? We basically said, okay, why don't we digitize and lend? So the idea is to wave a wand over all libraries and to turn their book collections into digital books. Then a patron can go and request either the physical book or the digital book, one or the other, and one reader at a time. So since we've been sort of keeping it to one reader at a time, nobody's gotten mad. That's all around working. We've been doing this for 6 years, and now we're trying to expand it to having other people do it. So how does this work? There's an open library site. Please use it. There's basically Internet Archive, archive.org, openlibrary.org, and archiveit.org. Those are the 3 websites that are the Internet Archive's websites. And this is a very book-oriented one. If you want to go and borrow a book, this happens to be checked out, so you can add it to your wait list. This less interesting, less popular one on Mayflower ancestors from the Boston Public Library is available to be borrowed. You can pick which format you want, and if you want the page turner, you click on it and you're reading right away. And you can search the book, and you have it for 2 weeks, and then it's automatically returned. No late fees, hooray. So the idea is to act like a library, kind of like a lame library. Because you'd look at it, it's like, well, why don't you make it much more available than that? And it's basically trying to be respectful to the publishers and authors and their lawyers. So the idea is you can have this library and make this available. We're starting to work with other libraries to highlight the books that they have in their collections that you can borrow to try to make it so that there's more broad dissemination. We're working and putting it back, little links into other people's library catalogs in such a way that you can go and say, oh, I don't want to go to the stacks for this book. I want to go and read it online. Maybe then, after you read it online, you go and find you want it from the stacks, specs, but it just gives more alternatives. And what we found is people kind of nod and say, yeah, it's kind of like a library. It's like, yes! Well, maybe we're going to make it through this one without the problems that Google ran into with their books program. The idea is to make it so that there's all of these materials online, and that way we can cite it, and if there's a highlight or a footnote that's into a book, it turns into a hypertext link. Can we make that true for all of Wikipedia links? Can we make it true for all journalists that they can go and cite in copyright, non-rights cleared materials, be able to search, click, see, and read the background materials? That's the idea. Music, which has less to do with journalism, but it's important media type. Through the 2000s, we tried to find. That was the Napster era. That's where there were lots of lawsuits. So we're trying to figure out how do we go and get music up and out there in such a way that people don't get mad. So we found the tape traders, the people that recorded concerts like the Grateful Dead and traded tapes. They had a mechanism of doing this as long as no one made any money. If nobody made any money, everybody was happy. So we said, okay, let's work with that community to go and provide free hosting. So we would offer unlimited storage, unlimited bandwidth forever for free. That was our offer. And they said, great, let's get this to happen. And the fans worked with the bands and tried to get some level of approval. So in this case, they just tried to have somebody say it was okay, like the drummer, whatever. So this is a lot less than all of your sort of what the lawyers would want. And it's worked out fine. We now have about 6,000 bands, 130,000 concerts, everything the Grateful Dead's ever done. So it was just trying to find ways through where people were happy. We're starting to bring back old internet websites full of music, like mp3.com, Internet Underground Music Archive, and making those back available again. And there are people using us for free hosting in the labels community, net labels that couldn't make it on CDs. And we're also starting to work with the real CD organizations and digitizing massive archives. So this is the Archive of Contemporary Music. We're digitizing 78 RPM records, now at about 300 a day, and about 400 a day of CDs. We're starting to get donations of these in massive style and putting together these joint projects to go and get everything ever done on 78s up online. And I have to say, it's completely fun. These are wacky. They're before my time, but they're before country music. There was hillbilly, there's sort of early blues, there's square dance calls, there's klezmer music that's much more broad and interesting than most of the klezmer I get to hear at weddings. And it's great to hear these materials come back to life, and it's all around working, and everyone seems to be happy. So the idea of 78s, CDs, and LPs, the LPs and CDs, we're not quite sure how to make that available. Maybe just 30 seconds pointing to where you can buy it. We'll make some progress there. But these donations are moving us forward. We're using volunteers as well as large-scale scanning efforts to go and digitize these and make them available at least on campus, but making motions with these modern materials to make them more broadly available. So even even music is doable to make it available. And we have now 3 million items from, I guess, 12,000 collections of things like Democracy Now's radio programs, lots of different radio programs. We're now, I think we're doing maybe 100 different radio stations from around the world to go and make those available. And we're trying to make those searchable by doing speech to text to be able to do, may not be very good transcriptions, but at least try to make it searchable. So even audio is doable. Okay, I've only got a couple more of these. So moving images, most people think of it as Hollywood films. Most of this is in copyright and actually currently commercially exploited. So we've been really working on mostly non-Hollywood films, but things like educational films, propaganda films, and the like. And this turned out to be very popular for reasons I don't really ever know why. But people like these things. I think because they use them for clip art, or they're trying to understand the 20th century. imagery, and they're a visual generation, and they're using these, including home movies now, to be able to make these available. We've also offered free uploading. Of course, YouTube has really sort of taken that whole market, but there's still people using us for free hosting. We're getting better at digitization. VHS tapes we're starting to do at scale. What we do is we look to see, are they for sale as DVDs new? If they are, then we don't do it. So it basically means that we don't do the Hollywood films. But all the others that may be in copyright, we've been making things available, at least streaming, and it's all around been working. So that's VHS. But television has been an area that we've started recording television in the year 2000. The Library of Congress was supposed to, but they didn't. So we hit the record button in the year 2000, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Iraqi, Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, ABC, Fox, 24 hours a day, DVD quality. Started with 20 channels, now up to around 60 channels that's being recorded. The idea there, and you'll hear more about this from Roger, was to lend television, to basically make it so that you could search and borrow materials building on the idea of Vanderbilt University's television news archive, but with a little bit more modern indexing structure, so you can go to the tv.archive.org website, be able to search on Snowden, find how often he has been mentioned on the news, be able to see clips, be able to put those into blogs or news articles so that they stream off of our site. And if you want the whole thing, we print it onto a DVD and lend it to you. And then you have to give it back. And you say, gosh, that's lame. It's like, yes, it's lame, but it's trying to be a library. And by doing this, it's been respectful and people haven't gotten mad. In fact, the publishers have been happy because they've been able to have access to things that they haven't really been able to do internally with their own archives. So in general, it's been working out for us. So please try out that service. But even that is possible to do at scale. So moving images, maybe 3 million items, 6,000 collections. If you start to do this kind of thing at scale, sometimes you attract attention from people you're not all that excited about. So for instance, the FBI gave us one of those nasty grams called National Security Letter. They've done this twice to us now, where they've gone and demanded information about patrons of the Internet Archive. Libraries have had a long history of people getting in trouble or being rounded up for what it is they've read in a library and bad things happening to them. So we have a tradition of pushing back, and pushing back on these is not easy. There is no judicial process. These don't actually come from a court. These just come from somebody in the government demanding information, then you can never actually tell them, anybody, that you've ever gotten one of these. So EFF, our lawyers, said, well, you have to comply. And so what if we don't? And they said, jail. And okay, that's not so good. Is there a court review? No. Is there anything we can do? Not really, except you can sue the United States government. So we sued the United States government, and we won. So yay! There have only been a handful of suits about these, and they've all come from libraries as a pushback, even though there have been hundreds of thousands of them. But it's, or at least public pushbacks. Maybe there's been ones that we don't know about. But it's showing that a library can still play its role, and society, if you push back, will remember what it is libraries are and what they're for. So we're special in some ways. Software, been working on making it so that you can emulate software, so you can bring old software back to life. We're probably best known, though, for the Wayback Machine and collecting the web. So we've been collecting the web, taking a snapshot every 2 months since 1996. The machine over here is missing one of its screens. It's being repaired, but we just got it back from the Library of Congress. We donated that in 1997 with the first complete web crawl. So it's actually an artist that said, okay, this is what the web looks like. It's called 2 terabytes in 63 inches. The World Wide Web, 1997. So the tapes that are along the left-hand side actually hold the copy of the web, and the screens are going in and showing screenshots from 1997. they liked the data. They didn't want the sculpture anymore, so they gave it back to us. So we're happy about that. But it tried to get them off the dime and start to move along. And you get to see what old sites look like: pets.com, Pinterest, growing into what it becomes. But there's also more serious uses. This was brought up by one of our users way back when. This is a press release from the White House of the president saying mission accomplished, standing on an aircraft carrier, and the headline is President Bush announces combat operation in Iraq has ended. Then a couple months later they changed it, so that it says the President Bush announces major combat operations in Iraq had ended. And then a couple months later they took it down completely. And it's just sort of surreal a little bit for me, in that sort of George Orwell kind of thing, is how about changing press releases? That's bad. How about just removing it completely? This wasn't even at the end of the term. They just took it away. This isn't right. There's something not right. And if you didn't know to look in the Wayback Machine, then you wouldn't have found it. And we've tried to make little widgets that work with your browser to go and find document not found, and go and look at us. But really, we want it built into the web so the web becomes more reliable. But the browser manufacturers haven't done it. We've got these widgets that do it, but there are only tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of people that use these widgets to go and make it so that the web is more reliable for them, because we want to make it so that you can't just blink things off the net and put it down the memory hole. Next up for us is some of the platform organizations and the personal collections that are living within these platforms that are often very much more difficult to get to and archive. It's not the sort of the tradition of blogs anymore. It's in these sort of Facebooks and Twitters, which has got its own issues. Okay, so I tried to argue that you can actually collect all of these materials and you can make some level of access to it. Then how do you preserve it? So if we want to be the Library of Alexandria version 2 for the digital age, let's learn from the Library of Alexandria version 1, which is probably best known for burning, right? By not being here anymore. It was a 500-year good run, but then it just went completely away. If they'd made another copy in India or China, we'd have the other plays of Euripides, the other works of Aristotle. We don't. So what happens to libraries? They're burned. That's what happens to them. And they're generally burned by governments. So let's make copies. So when they started up the new Library of Alexandria in Egypt, we said, why don't we give you a copy? And this is what it looks like in 2002. And they put it behind glass, and it was completely beautiful. It was actually really quite inspiring. This is what the start of the Stichting Internet Archive in Amsterdam. This is what it looked like in San Francisco, 2008. This is what the Wayback Machine looked like in 2009. It was actually in a shipping container, it was sat outside. The machine was a shipping container. So I get to answer, how big is the web? But you have to ask me. How big? The web is 20 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet. And it weighs 26,000 pounds, which is about 80 micrograms a hit. That's sort of how much it weighs. The current web, as Mark pointed out, and also the whole Wayback Machine, that's about 10 petabytes of our 35 petabytes of current store that are on those servers. And every time a light blinks, it shows use. And I think it's kind of interesting. It's sort of like OpenStax. It's just sort of to try to be out there so we understand what it is we're dealing with, and it's much more on a human scale. We thought we'd just try to do all of the digital materials ever, digitized books. We wanted one copy of everything ever published digitally, but we found that libraries were throwing things away. So we started to get better at physically collecting things. So we made a new kind of archive, if you will, very, very dense. It's basically things like books or movies and music in boxes, on pallets, in shipping containers, in warehouses, surrounded by nonprofits. So the idea is to sort of try to protect these materials for preservation where the access is online. So the next steps that were really sort of our agenda that came up a year ago is we want to try to make a copy in Canada to basically make sure that these things stay safe in a changing environment. We've always wanted to do this, but it's the priorities and sort of focus on that has turned up. A decentralized web so that websites live everywhere and nowhere, so it's less easy to just take them down or block them from readers, so that by doing these sort of firewalls. So a decentralized web structures. We wanted to go and increase our operational security to be able to protect our readers and ourselves, and I should spell better, operational security. And we want to be a better library. So this is our idea of sort of throwing ourselves forward, not just being an archive, but let's become a library. Let's be useful to society to try to understand itself. So can we make it so that all these published works are easily linkable and viewable by people that are curious and using Google or Wikipedia, or journalists trying to understand the history of healthcare? Let's get the best materials out there. And lastly, the sort of major initiative is this Digitize and Lend as a mechanism of getting through the copyright issues going forward. In conclusion, universal access to all knowledge. I think it could be one of the greatest things humans have ever done. Be up there with the Library of Alexandria or the Man on the Moon kind of projects. I think it would elicit and be symbolic of our open times, of universal education, of individual fulfillment, that can be matched with the technology of the internet and the storage to be able to build great libraries. And closing with what Andrew Carnegie put carved in stone above his legacy in Pittsburgh, PA, free to the people. Thank you very much. Any questions?
So are there crowdsourcing type efforts that can help, like, with Zoom?
This whole thing is a crowdsource. So how can you help?
Yeah.
If you go to archive.org, there's an upload button. Hit it. Hit the upload button. Add something. Just try it out. If you start uploading a bunch of things, somebody will contact you from here and will make a collection out of it and make that go. There's, on the Wayback Machine page, there's Save Page Now, which people are using to go and say, I want this page to be saved, whatever it looks like now, and I want an archival URL. That's being hit by 50 times a second. We think it's by robots that are going and doing this. We all have something we want to make permanent. We all have expertise. We all have something to share. Let's use this technology to move things forward. Bring some books to a local scanning center and get it on. Use your phone. Take something and upload it, and just get used to it of how this whole thing works. And complain at us. Go and say it's not good enough because, and we'll may not get to it right away, but we're here to try to make it possible to make a long-term legacy out of the materials. That said, we now need to make it much more accessible. We need it to be woven into how people think. We haven't fulfilled the promise of the web. The promise of the web is that it's a global brain of interlinked neurons connecting ideas. There are a lot of links out there on the web. The average number of links on outbound links off-site is 7 per web page. That's awesome, but they're not updated terribly well. They're often not reliable. It's often not to the best stuff. I take the last election really hard, actually. I think that we in the internet got some things majorly wrong. We've built the front door to information. I think of Wikipedia as the front door, now it's time to build the house. It's thin. What's out there is thin, and we have to make it more robust. And that's a group that would come to here and spend a couple days on this. This is hopefully resonance, and if we can play our technological role to your expertise roles, that could be a good partnership.
So Catherine Skinner, Educopia Institute, and I've got two things to say. One, the 50 hits a second that you're getting, some of those are now coming from us, because one of the things that we've put in place as a policy now at Educopia is if we cite, sorry, do I need to, I'll just hold it. So if we cite anything at Educopia at this point, especially if we put it in print, but also when we cite it on the web, we are now going to the page where you can save on
Yay,
PDF, and we are saving every one of those, and we're labeling that. So you'll see that in our publications, our white papers, all of those kinds of things at this point. So those are not all bots, which I know you know. But my question is actually coming from one 501c3 to another. So Educopia Institute, the way that we have structured things and the way that we run it, it is about building networks and communities. And so we've got kind of a public good stance. We work with libraries, archives, museums, publishers, et cetera. And we've been very careful in the structuring of Educopia itself to protect the communities that embed themselves under us. So things like Meta Archive Cooperative, Big Curator Consortium, et cetera. Those are as free as they can be under our auspices while we are their fiscal and legal host. And it's taken work even just to do things like that in order to protect the things that we build from ourselves and from the fallibility of a board and an executive director, which is always there. So I have admired everything that you guys have done at Internet Archive. I am one of your biggest champions, but I also worry because you're not a national library, because and not that that would protect it either in current climates, but how do you think about the infrastructure of your nonprofit itself, and knowing the responsibility that you are building here through building these outrageously impressive collections that have a vision behind them that honestly defies anything else that I've seen going on at national scales, local scales, et cetera. How do you make sure that those are protected for future generations?
Right, and protected from us.
And protected from you.
Yes, and me, particularly. Good question. I think the only real way forward is copies. What's a little surprising is the Internet Archive is still unique. Right? We gave that thing to the Library of Congress and we said, go. Right? You have $400 million a year. We don't. Go. And they didn't. And it's really kind of the same way all around. And some of it I think is network effects, like there's a winner takes all kind of world that happens. Like, oh well, they're doing it, therefore we don't have to. So there's some of that going on. We tried to make the Library of Alexandria into another, and we did the Stichting Internet Archive and the Internet Memory Foundation. Julien Mazanes is here. He tried to make one run in Europe, but it's not been easy. It's not been forthright. I think that we're not called crazy anymore, so that's really good. And that wasn't, 20 years ago, it was like, what? But now it's sort of seen as something that lots of institutions do. The web collection, they build these archival collections. There are now 500 of them that do that, and then they take their bits home. And they often run their own Wayback Machine. Ilya's here, who's built a little downloadable Wayback Machine that lots of people use. There are people that are doing things more on focused collections, but the broad concept is still, we're fairly unique. I'd say one of the big things that will keep us alive is being supported on an ongoing basis. Money comes with a point of view. And this place costs about, I don't know, $15 million a year. 2/3 of it comes from libraries that pay us to digitize books and collect web pages. And about 1/3 comes from foundations and end-of-year donations. We'd like to see that those end-of-year donations, the small donations, go up. That allows us to focus more on external access than it is for the collecting that we are commissioned for. So I'm hoping that where Wikipedia is, I think, $90 million a year, that sort of thing, which is awesome. We got about $1 to $2 million last year. So I'm hoping that we can kind of up ourselves in that sort of way. So buy a hat or something like that downstairs.
Buy a million hats.
Buy a million hats.
Okay.
James.
Hi, James Jacobs, Stanford University and Free Government Information. Thank you.
Speak right into it.
Thank you, Brewster. Am I speaking into it now?
Yes.
There, that sounds better. I want to know about Zotero Commons. Catherine raised the issue of citation, and I think citation is really important to academic communities, to the public. There used to be something called Zotero Commons, where when someone saved a citation to a journal article, to a web page, whatever, a snapshot of that page went into the Internet Archive.
Yes.
And I have not been able to find any information about the Zotero Commons
So
in quite a while.
Mellon gave us funding to hook up with Zotero, and what came out of that was great. It just wasn't what we thought it was going to happen at first. We basically built an interface to the Internet Archive so anybody could go and plunk things into the Internet Archive. We made ourselves into an Amazon cloud service. We emulated the protocols S3, and that's been now the way that we get things at scale from all sorts of people. When we tried to hook it up into Zotero itself, it didn't work all that well. They wanted their own copy, so they made their own copy, and we were kind of off to the side, and it wasn't really, it didn't quite go all the way through. So I'm not surprised that it's not there. I think it's still a good idea, but we didn't succeed that first time through. But what we did do is make it so that anybody could go and upload to the Internet Archive at scale, and boy, do they. So I'd say it was still money well spent. It just wasn't quite the money spent in the way we thought it would be.
Nice, thanks.
Well, I thank you very much, and I appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thank you, Brewster. Inspiring, challenging, a lot of things to think about there. And thank you for your presentation. And speaking about working with the Internet Archive, our next presenter does just that. His name is Eric Weig. He's a digital library architect at the University of Kentucky, the Special Collections Research Center. He holds an MLS from the University of Iowa and has worked as an academic librarian for more than 20 years. His major research area is digital libraries with an emphasis on online access for newspapers, archival collections, and oral history. So the title of his presentation is Utilizing the Internet Archive as an Object Store for Historic Newspapers. Eric. Let's see.
Hello, can everyone hear me? I'm going to try the best I can to talk into the microphone. I have a fairly soft voice to begin with, so I'm always conscious of that anyway. I'd like to start out by thanking Ed for inviting me here to do this presentation, and also for thanking everyone at the Internet Archive. I've been a fan for many years, and the first thing I did this morning when I got here was to buy a t-shirt. I didn't buy a hat, but I bought a t-shirt. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically how at the University of Kentucky we started using the Internet Archive as an object store for historic and born Born Digital print-ready newspapers. Basically, this is going to kind of give a brief overview of how we're doing it infrastructure-wise, and then on to a demo. So the focus of this talk is basically we're using a microservices approach to content management for a large historic newspaper site, and it's one that utilizes the Internet Archive as an object store. And we found that this enhances access, scalability, preservation, and technology stack evolution for the Kentucky Digital Newspaper Program. A little bit about the Kentucky Digital Newspaper Program. This is our website to access the newspapers that are online. Also provides links to our project site that gives some historical information about our program, which really began in 2005. We were a testbed partner in the National Digital Newspaper Program, and one of the interesting things that we did was actually do the digitization in-house rather than outsource it, and we were the only site that did that, and actually worked with LC to test that as a model. The site hosts historic newspaper images, both derived from analog sources as well as Born Digital PDF pages. Some of the older newspapers that aren't in the NDNP that are a part of our site, we also digitized in color. For example, the Kentucky Gazette, the first newspaper published in the state, we have online. Right now, we're also looking at how to actually incorporate Born Digital news into our site so that HTML-based news that we harvest can actually be searched and accessed alongside the other formats as well. We began a technological redesign in 2005, and this was really driven by some internal and external factors. Externally, some of the grants that were supporting our project, first and foremost, the NDNP, were winding down, and also some internal reorganizations were not putting the newspaper work that we were doing at the forefront, and part of that involved the campus infrastructure moving to a cloud-based system. So we had everything on these big physical servers, and we had to figure out a way of how to support it in a cloud environment. So what we eventually developed was a microservices approach to content management, and for those of you that aren't familiar with microservices, it's basically structuring an application as a collection of loosely coupled services which, bundled together, implement an intended purpose. Our intended purpose with the newspapers is preservation and access for historic newspaper content that comes from the state of Kentucky. I actually developed a framework to work with this, along with a fellow programmer at UK, Michael Sloan. And this framework we call Minimal CM, and basically it's meant to be a very lightweight way to implement a content management system that utilizes these coupled services. I'm going to share this diagram. I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot, but I thought it might be useful to put it up. This basically is an outline of the major layers, basically the object layer, which is the Internet Archive, which actually stores the page images with the OCR that's searchable. The query result layer, which is a PHP-based part of Minimal CM, which actually handles the interface that allows users to search, and then it talks to a Solr index layer, which handles retrieval of the search results and passing that back and forth. We do store the objects, on the Internet Archive as an object layer. We also store them on Google Drive, and we're also starting to store them on tape. As Brewster mentioned, we also feel more copies is the best way to go. So the more copies of something that we can have, the better. So how did this enhance access? Well, our usage went up because we now have multiple points of access for greater discoverability. You can find our newspapers through our main site. You can find it at archive.org as well, and you can also find it through google.com. So there's actually 3 ways to search and find content. Scalability. The separate layers approach we found spreads the workload to reduce the technological cost. It's actually, the servers that we used in the past were quite expensive for our budgets, but by distributing the workload, we basically have one VM running the Solar Index, another VM running the front-end discoverability search layer, and then the objects are in the Internet Archive, and those things kind of are loosely coupled together. So in essence, from the technology stack kind of picture, it's costing us about $100 a year to support the site. So the object store layer is on the Internet Archive again. The index is on a virtual local machine. And then the search and access VM is actually a reclaimhosting.com site. If some of you may be familiar with their service, which basically is kind of specifically targeted at higher education organizations. So how is it enhanced preservation? We were already using ARC identifiers, and by utilizing the Internet Archive, it actually allowed us to keep those identifiers and actually also support them within that object layer, which made everything kind of really easy as far as, bringing things together in a loosely coupled fashion. We consider the Internet Archive to be a very mature repository, and that has given us a lot of benefits as well for preservation. One, fixity, geographic distribution, and in the future, more redundancy. As Brewster had talked about, the potential for the Canadian mirror to come down the road. Evolving technology stack. The services in the microservices approach can be swapped out. For instance, a couple examples of that is we've done a little bit of playing around with Elasticsearch versus Solar, and that's not going to involve a re-engineering of the entire site. It'll just be that one layer that kind of gets re-engineered a bit. Another example would be right now, actually our view pages, the item view pages are statically generated, which means if we have 20,000 issues in the site, there's actually 20,000 static pages. We found that costs less as far as, the amount of, we can run the site with a lower level of CPU utilization that way. The pages load quicker. Also, if the index goes down, Google and the Internet Archive can still find our static pages. So, but we also developed a way to generate those dynamically, and we can easily swap those two things out. Right now, we're sticking with the static approach, though, because over the last 10 years, we've had to edit maybe half a dozen newspaper bits of metadata. So it's pretty stable metadata in itself, so we haven't really had to edit it a lot. So the whole site can be regenerated as far as those static pages are concerned in about 2 hours. So if we want to change the look and feel of something, we can do it in an overnight process. So yeah, services can be added and swapped out without compromising the overall design. Oops. And so then we get to the mature repository for that we consider the Internet Archive to be. First and foremost, its longevity. It's been around since 1996. We wholeheartedly agree with its mission, which basically has been talked about already today as universal access to all knowledge. It's, as librarians, it's an easy sell. This was talked about a little bit, Brewster mentioned at the end of his talk, but administrators with the Internet Archive can establish and maintain collections, view usage statistics, and edit metadata. So again, a lot of the services that it provides are quite robust for administrators. We also found some open source software on GitHub that we were able to utilize, customize a little bit, and utilize that allows us to batch load new content in. So it's not an item by item load. We actually script it in using this GitHub open source software. So now we get to the part where we're going to do a demonstration, and I'm going to actually show some of the things that we did with the use of the API in the Internet Archive specifically for historic newspapers. And give me a moment here to open up the site here. So the website is KentuckyNewspapers.org, and I'm going to do a search that I already prepared here to do this demonstration. I'm going to go through some of the features. So if you get a search result and you click on it, you get to our item view page, which is where a lot of the Internet Archive, the layer of the Internet Archive interaction happens. What you're looking here, which might not be completely readily apparent, is actually the Internet Archive viewer is embedded in the page here. And you can see the search results that I did with our interface carried over into that viewer, and the search results are displaying on the page image there. You can also spawn the zoom viewer by going the full screen mode here. And again, the search carries over there. You can see it down here. We can go back to the other page here. Some of the unique things that we did, one little application that we developed using the API is the ability for a user to not only download a specific page, but actually resize it on the download. So if they're looking at this issue and they want to go to page 3 and actually download a copy of that for some reason to take away with them, they can set the width in pixels here and get that image, and it actually dynamically generates it through the API at the Internet Archive, and then they can download that page and take it away with them. That's been something, traditionally building digital libraries at the University of Kentucky, at least, that people have wanted to do in some way or another. And on older sites that we did, it was quite cumbersome to let them download the entire issue or even a page specifically at a high resolution that they wanted. So then you get down to the ability to, or the task of having to handle those requests sort of by hand, getting the image for them and sending it to them, where with this aspect they can actually do that work themselves quite easily. One of the other really nice things about the Internet Archive, as far as allowing users to access the actual source files, so we have a link there, and these are all the source files that get generated when you upload specifically image-based content into the Internet Archive, and it's all downloadable. So one of the interesting ways that we've utilized this particular aspect of the Internet Archive's site within ours is we had a professor last summer that was in the linguistics department, and they were doing an institute, actually an international institute at the University of Kentucky on linguistics. And he met with us and said, you guys have a lot of newspapers online, a lot of text. We want to be able to actually do text mining with that content. And the first thing we did is actually gathered all the text information and did a word count for him, and it was 1.6 billion words within our archive, which was kind of interesting to do that work. But the next step he wanted to do was actually, how can I allow students to get easy access to the full text for these newspapers, for them to not only download, but maybe at an issue level at least be able to look at the raw text and look at the image, and do some text mining. We've developed a little beta tool which right now basically allows them to do that easily, to get access to the text, and it's pulling the files right off the Internet Archive. So if I click on this text mining tool beta here, it actually just presents the raw text in a searchable way down there and the image up top. We plan to further develop this, working with this professor and some of his colleagues to have a more rich kind of text mining kind of experience on this level that'll allow more analysis kind of searching to take place. we have a few interesting links I'm going to point out just because Wikipedia has been talked about quite a bit today. So some of the metadata that we gather has to do with region and county information, location information in the state. So for a specific issue, you get to see kind of a map representation of where that issue was published in the state. You can also click on a link and pull up the Wikipedia entry for that county or that region in the state of Kentucky and read about that particular place. So that was easy to integrate. Another interesting aspect of the Internet Archive is through the API, once you have content loaded, you can actually pull metadata from it dynamically. And so we're able to gather usage information and pull it into our interface from their site, which is how you're able to look at the number of views this particular item had there. So in essence, that's it. One other little feature we produced here was a thumbnail. You can scan through the thumbnails here, click on one of them, and it'll jump to that page in the viewer. It's pulling those thumbnails from the Internet Archive as well. So this started out as an experiment, really. That's something that we, had thought about, and let's see what we can do. I wasn't terribly familiar with how the Internet Archive worked as far as being able to put content in. I found that it was extraordinarily easy to work with and much more powerful than I had known before getting into it. So it's given us more stability for our site, and like I said, it's increased usage because there's more ways to find our content, and we've actually been able to add interesting new features that were not available before, like the page download that I just demonstrated there earlier. So I think I've ended maybe about 3 minutes early, but I'm fine to open it up for questions at this point.
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions, and you can just pick one and answer that one.
Sure.
So you're doing some OCR, it looks like, at one point, and then it also looks like you're linking in there, so maybe some natural language. Are you linking on names or something inside the OCR? And I noticed there, like Lexington was not correct, so you have you... the word Lexington, Kentucky had some, so I wondered if you've thought about, since you're doing so much OCR stuff, maybe there's common patterns for correction like that. And the last one, again, pick any of these, is so you seem to have two URLs. You have one at Internet Archive and one here. Are your or do you care about analytics? Are you doing anything about putting those two together in analytics? And yeah, any of those would be
great.
fine.
I mean, I'd like to answer a few of those. The last one, actually, the URLs share the ID. So one part of the URL is common. And actually, we gather all the usage statistics through the Internet Archive layer, because if someone accesses our page, it's also accessing the Internet Archive layer, so we feel that's the most accurate count on usage. Your other question had to do with the OCR, and when you upload content, textual content into the Internet Archive, you can trigger it to do the OCR, which we do. One of the things that brings up for me, which I didn't mention, is I'm very interested in. So we started with the National Digital Newspaper Program work before we were kind of doing it outside of that project, and they use a OCR bounding box data format called Alto, and what the bounding box data does is allow that search hit highlighting to happen. And the Internet Archive actually uses another XML format for that, and one of the things I'm very curious with talking about and I'm looking into now is how to take Alto content and convert it so that it can be uploaded into the Internet Archive and actually be utilized in that way, rather than having to have the OCR regenerated when we upload images. So I'm not sure if that specifically answers your question. That is how the bounding box data, the XML data, that it records all the coordinates of the words on the page that the OCR has derived, and they also correspond with those coordinates to the matching page image. So when someone gets a search hit and they find it in the XML, it then maps. It knows where that word is on the page, and it can highlight and create overlay on the image, and that's how that works. So it's kind of an interplay between the XML, the full text, and the image. I think Brewster had his hand up earlier.
If you don't mind. Hi, I'm Gregory. I work at the San Francisco Public Library. I'm sorry if I missed something when I was in the restroom really quick. Curious about copyright and, like, are these all out of print or anything current? And then just curious how well like staff are being able to be trained on this and how well that's going with actually getting this into the hands of people.
Sure. The copyright, a lot of it is out of copyright. Certainly everything that we did with the Library of Congress project was out of copyright. The stuff that's in copyright, we actually get written agreements from the publishers before we put any of it online. So we have written agreements with the publishers in order to put that content online. What was your second question again? Sorry. Oh, yeah, loading content, sure. That's actually always been a struggle for us because we don't get a lot of staff support for this. So we've tried to develop as much automation into it as possible. Something I didn't demonstrate due to time was we have a back-end service that myself and a few others designed at UK called Paper Vault, which actually is our kind of workflow processing system where we load the content in, quality control it, and once it's approved, it actually spawns or it actually triggers the automated batch loading process into the object store layer. So that's something I didn't have time to really talk about or certainly demonstrate today, but that helps a lot. We can actually we're trying to ramp up right now to have people actually outside of our area, our department area, that have time to work on it to do that and give them accounts to Paper Vault and have them doing it. So it's something that is going to be incrementally growing, I think, as it gains more success. But we do have a workflow management system in place to help that.
You said you've been approached by people to data mine your collections. What use in that kind of area are you finding fruitful, or where do you see that going?
Well, the folks on campus, the linguistics group on campus that we did some work with this summer really want to create a system where their students and their researchers can actually put textual content into a system and do data mining analysis with it. And they essentially want to use the newspaper data because of its scale right now to start that out. And so what we did this summer was a really quick thing on the site to allow them to just, get their hands wet, so to speak. And we're continuing to meet with them and try to ramp something up that develops a better tool that's specifically geared for that. In the context of this site, though, we found the way, like in our old newspaper site, it was difficult to get access to the different components of the digitized package. And the wonderful thing about using the Internet Archive, or one of the wonderful things about it, was it's very easy to get access to those components. And so we got approached by this professor, I think just a couple weeks before this institute was going to happen, and we were able to add this feature to the site and give him the statistics on the word count, which we actually pulled the files down from the Internet Archive to do that analysis in a automated fashion. But so I do think that's a particular, it hasn't been talked about a lot in meetings I've been in, but in conferences I've been at, but newspaper data with its scale, I think, is a prime candidate for text mining. So I hope that answers your question. Great. Any other questions? Oh, sure, over here.
Yeah. I was just curious, you kind of mentioned at the beginning that you're looking at and experimenting with born digital HTML content. And I'm working with an organization that's doing a lot of work around tracking how web content changes over time. And that's kind of an interesting problem that's a little bit different from tracking like images of newspapers. News online, headlines might change or content might change with a lot more frequency, and I was just curious, as you're starting starting to experiment with that, whether you've thought very much about that particular issue and how you plan to approach that or solve it or any of those sorts of things.
Yeah, we haven't thought about that in any great detail right now. We've had some discussions about, dealing with the HTML newspaper content. Most of those discussions have been framed around something that we haven't really seen in the wild on the internet yet, which is, that's not to say that it doesn't exist. I may just not have encountered it, but that is a historic newspaper site which allows you to search the old content derived from analog, the born digital print ready content, and HTML-based content all in one interface. We found so far, a lot of the newspaper sites that we currently, quote unquote, have rights to look at the, harvesting the HTML content are very rural, small newspapers. The content is not as dynamic as far as changing over time, but I do think that will come into play when we look at things like the Courier-Journal, the Lexington Herald-Leader, the big newspapers, the Paducah Sun, the big ones in the state, which will, have multiple editions, and the content will be more dynamic. So it's definitely something we need to look at. I'm sorry to say that we haven't actually done a lot of discussing on that particular aspect of it at this point. Another question?
Hi, James Jacobs. I'm wondering, I assume that the advertising is OCR'd, but I'm wondering if you've thought about pulling the ads out as a separate searchable database. I'm sure I could search for kernel and find every kernel of the week, but one of the most interesting parts about research is looking at the advertising over time, and so I wondered if you're doing that or if you're thinking of doing that.
Sure. That's something we've actually had a number of discussions on over the years with newspapers in general. And right now, I would say definitely has research value. There's no doubt. I wouldn't argue with that at all. It's expensive to do that right now in an automated fashion. I don't think the technology is at a point where it's accurately done in a fully automated way. We did do one project, the Daily Racing Forum. Kentucky is very well known for its horse racing, and Keeneland Racing Association, which is in Lexington, owns the full archive in print of the Daily Racing Forum, and we did a project with them about 10 years ago where we digitized about 400,000 articles from that, and we actually we did some of it in-house and some of it outsourced, the actual article clipping. And, we found through that process that at that particular point in time, at least, it was a labor-intensive, expensive process to get that. For that particular resource, which can be accessed at drf.uky.edu, the advertisements are clipped, and you can actually limit a search to the advertisements. But there's research value in there. It's just how to get to it in an economical way with the amount of staff that we've got. So, any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And we've got a little bit of extra time for our next break, which you can use because as per the terms of our grant from when you get a federal grant, if you're going to use those funds for food or beverages, you have to have some sort of educational activity going on at the same time. So I have an assignment for you during the break. That is to introduce yourself to someone that you don't know and ask them, what are you doing here? What brings you to this place? I think that would be an incredibly good way for us all to get to know each other and fulfill our requirements. We'll have something like this at all the food breaks. We have little assignments for you, hopefully that are useful as well. So we're going to get back together at 10:45. And let's make sure we're back in here so we can get going. Thanks. did you meet some new people? Could they explain them? Did they have a satisfactory explanation for why they were here? I hope. If not, then they're going to find out, right? They're going to discover something intriguing. Well, I think we've got probably a few people still munching out there, but we'll get started with the next presentation. The presenters are Martin Klein and Mark Graham. Martin Klein is a scientist in the research library at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. His research and development efforts focus on temporal aspects of the web, discovery and access of archived web resources, and the interoperability of web-based scholarly communication systems. Mark Graham has created and managed innovative online products and services since 1984. As director of the Wayback Machine, he is responsible for capturing, preserving, and helping people discover and use more than 1 billion new web captures each week. Mark was most recently Senior Vice President with NBC News. He's done a lot of amazing things. So with that, we'll turn it over to Martin.
Hi, thank you, Edward. All right. All right, so what I'd like to talk to you about today is our proposal of how to make linking on the web more robust. I'm going to talk for 23 minutes maybe, and then hand it over to Mark for some other aspects from the perspective of the Internet Archive. So our proposal that we call Robust Links is, of course, a team sort of an effort, right? This is not just my work. Collaborators that I'd like to mention here is, of course, Herbert van der Zampel from Los Alamos, as well as Harish Shankar, and Michael Nelson from Old Dominion University has been a steady collaborator in this as well. So to put this into some sort of a context, please follow me with this sort of a thought experiment and envisioning pockets of the web as collections. So a collection could be, your news publisher. A collection could be Wikipedia. A collection could be a scholarly publisher of scholarly articles. And what all those collections have in common, or the providers of those collections have in common, that they'd like to create links and create robust links to other resources on the web. And intuitively, you would probably agree that it seems seems easier to maintain those links within a collection or between collections, right? So resource A in collection 1, linking to resource to resource B in collection 2. Those two things, if those collections are really managed, seem easier to maintain. Just think of DOIs in the scholarly communication realm, where that is a proposal of how to address this. However, what we're interested in robustifying, the sort of links that we're trying to make more stable, is the links that are going out of those collections. So they're going into the wild, right? So they're basically references to web at large resources, things that we do not have under our control, resources that are not managed by us, per se. And you'll know those sort of scenarios where you link to one page, to one web at large resource, like I did in 2013, to the web page of the General Assembly of the International Internet Preservation Consortium. If you follow that link today, you get this. This is your typical 404 page not found sort of a scenario. The notion that we call, that's commonly referred to as link rot, which is one part of the problem. The other part is what we refer to as content drift. So that's a scenario where I linked to the web page of the EPA talking about climate change at the end of 2016. If you follow that link now, you get this, which is not per se a 404. This is not page not found. You still get a 200 OK sort of response if you dereference this URI, but the content has changed, right? This is obviously not what I, as the author, as the creator of the link, link intended to reference at the end of 2016. However, if you read my article today, reference this link, you'll get here. So that's the notion of content drift, where the content of the page has changed over time in a way that it may not represent the content that I intended to reference anymore. So the combination of the first scenario, link rot, and the second scenario, content drift, is what we refer to as reference rot on the web. And our proposal, Robust Links, is trying to address this notion of reference rot. So the problem here, as a sort of a summary statement for the problem statement, all links on the web are subject to reference rot, right? So we frequently see 404s, we constantly see content drift, so that's a ubiquitous problem on the web. It's not only a problem on the web in terms of news publications or Wikipedia or the Internet Archive, it's also a problem in scholarly communication. And in the last 3-4 years, we've ran several scientific experiments to quantify the notion of reference rot and content drift in scholarly communication, published 2 papers in PLOS ONE about it. I'll share these slides later on, so there's no need to copy and paste URIs here. Sean, I think, is in the audience. Sean was an instrumental author of the second PLOS paper there, and basically the point here is it is just as bad as a problem in scholarly communication as it is elsewhere, right? So we're frequently referencing URIs in our scholarly articles, but we do not take care of the destination of those links. So here a little diagram showing the linkage between the archive's physics preprint corpus, Elsevier articles, and the PMC, the central corpus, and where they link to, what sort of top-level domain they link to. And at the time of running the experiment, this is basically what is left of those links, right? So the non-gray portion is the portion of the links that are still working today. So that's just a visual confirmation of how bad the problem is. A different way of visualizing the problem is this sort of a bar diagram over time. So these are the scholarly articles over time that do contain links to Web at Large resources, and how they have changed, if they are still even active today. So the rightmost bar, if you see that, these are the articles from 2012, and the lightest shade of blue in the top right corner, that is the fraction of outlinks that still are working today, or at the time we ran the experiment in late 2015. So roughly 1/4, right? 25% of links in scholarly articles are still working. Everything else is either subject to content drift, so their content has changed at some level, or the black portion of that bar, they are subject to link rot. So they are actually 404. So these are scary sort of graphs, right? This is the whole point. So if you come back to our problem statement, then we ask ourselves the question, how can we make those links more robust, regardless of whether it is in scholarly communication or a news publication or for Wikipedia, you name it. And how can we make those links not only more robust, but also actionable for machines? And our proposal is Robust Links. It's what we call Robust Links. And it basically consists of 2 steps that we asked publishers and authors to do. Step number 1, create a snapshot of your reference, of the web page that you reference. And Catherine has fortunately given me that token earlier with her question. Educopia is doing this, right? Catherine writes articles and reports all day long. Whenever she references a URI on the web, she makes a copy in the Internet Archive. That is great. That's the first step. We're arguing that make as many copies as you can, and we've heard this earlier today as well. There are other archives that you can utilize for the very same purpose. So the Internet Archive offers, as you've heard by now, the Save Page Now sort of a functionality. Archive.is does the very same thing. PermaCC does the very same thing, but with a different sort of business model behind it. And Web Citation has been around for a while, constantly struggling, but still around. They offer the very same sort of a service. So now you may ask the question, why would I do this multiple times? Can I just go at one place and then do this? Yeah, of course you could, but the point is there's nothing special about web archives, right? They're just websites basically as well. Does anyone remember mummify.it? All right, so that there used to be in the same realm of an archiving service that provided that service to you. You could submit a URI, they would go out, archive it, and then would give you a somewhat hashed, cryptic sort of a URI back. This is where your archive copy is at. Well, they went out of service. And so if you had relied on Mummify.it 3-4 years ago, you would be completely out of luck by now, and you would have a ton of those URIs that don't mean anything, right? So more archives, more better is the message here, and diversify as much as we can. So that's step one. Step two, after you've done this, and that's where, again, I would address Catherine's example, after having created an archival snapshot, decorate your links in your document, right? The point here being, if you just use the URI of the archived snapshot that you have just created and put this in your document only, you're not changing the game. You're not changing anything. Because what if, again, Mummify.it goes out of business and your link still doesn't work again? You basically replaced one link rot problem with another, right? So what we're proposing is to enhance your links with more information. So do not throw away the original URL of the page that you're referencing to, but enhance it with the URL of the archived snapshot and the date time of when you're doing the linking. And hopefully this will become clear in a second of why this is what we're proposing. And a robust link decorated with these sort of attributes may look like this, or can actually look like this. This is standard HTML, so we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're not proposing any new attributes or anything. This is standard HTML. You'll recognize the URL of an archived snapshot that I've created a few days ago in the href attribute. So this leads you to the archived snapshot in the Internet Archive. And we're adding two pieces of information to that link. Number one is the original URL. This is what I looked at, at the time of citing, of referencing this link, and the data version date. This is the date when I created this link, right? So this doesn't, again, this is standard, right? This doesn't break anything. Browsers deal with it, or can visualize this nicely, and if you do not feel like doing this manually, you can do this automatically. If you like coding, if you like scripting, we created an API that does exactly that. So again, this may not be readable on the left-hand side, the screenshot. What this API does is you submit a URL of an archived snapshot that you have just created, and the API returns back our snippet of robust links HTML. So this is a way for you to automatically, with a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of coding here and there, to automatically ingest basically robust links into your publication, whether it's a blog or an article, an HTML article, basically. These sort of things will work. Now, of course, the next step, which we haven't done yet, is combine this sort of functionality, this sort of API functionality, with the functionality of pushing copies of URLs into multiple archives at the same time. And therein, students at ODU have created Archive Now, I believe it's what it's called, a service, basically also an API, that automatically pushes URLs into these 4 different archives that I mentioned earlier: the Internet Archive, PermaCC, archive.is, and Web Citation. And so combining these two services would, round this up nicely, but that's still on our to-do list, basically. Okay, so with these sort of link decorations, in order to make links more robust, what do we gain? Well, it's basically, I keep referring to this as multiple fallbacks, basically, right? So imagine you have established your robust links, you link to an archived copy of your page, and the archive goes down. Well, as it would be right now, what Catherine, sorry to keep dwelling on you, what Catherine scenario would be right now is that you just return a 4.4, right? If the archive is down, your link does not work anymore. However, since you have included the original URL and the date time of linking, you have the two pieces of information that you need to ask other archives, hey, do you have a copy? Because the archive that I use is down right now. These are the two pieces of information that we need right now to ask other archives for archival copies of the same URL that either have been created incidentally or that you have created because you are a good citizen and used multiple archives to create copies. And since it is based on standard HTML, it is machine actionable. And I'll give you maybe 2.5 really brief examples of what I mean by machine actionable and machine accessible. The first is based on a little, very small, I think 10, 15 lines of JavaScript. And we have tricked the DLib magazine in the past in adopting this. And Herbert in particular has published an article in the DLib magazine, I think a year and a half, something like that ago, where he robustified all the links, right? So maybe you can see this next to all links in that HTML-based article. There's a little link chain, sort of an icon, and if you click on that, you get this little pop-down that says robust links, and it offers you the option of going to the archived version of that link, of that URL, right? It also, in the center, that gives you the option of trying to find an archived copy that was archived around the time of linking in a different archive. So that's, again, the notion of how can we automatically, in a somewhat automatic fashion, interact with those links that we're ingesting in our documents here. So that's really just a very simple JavaScript. And the second option that I'd like to point to really quickly is our Memento for Chrome extension. So that's an extension to the web browser Chrome that we implemented at Los Alamos a number of years ago by now. And it lets you go back in time for linking. What it does also, though, is it allows you to right-click on a link and get additional options. So if you left-click on a link, you would go to the live version of the link as it was before. If you right-click on that link, you get a little menu item there, and the menu says, for example, get the archive version of this URI from the archive.today. Archive is same thing. It also gives you other options of getting, again, the link at a time that you created that link, but in a different archive. So as a sort of a segue to what Mark is going to talk about, the Internet Archive has a browser extension as well, which allows you, without taking your talking points, which allows you to actively create archived copies of a page. And what I did, for example, I created a copy of the RGI website of this event, and this is what you get in return. You'll recognize the bar in the top. I'm sure all of you have seen this. And in the top right, there's a little button that says About This Capture, which gives you information of who created and where and how and those sort of things. What we envision, and that's where Mark and I are in communication, what you envision is another button there that pops down and gives you a copy and pastable HTML snippet, so you can easily copy and paste the robust links HTML into your document. So Catherine's life, for example, is much, much easier while writing HTML-based documents, right? So to sum up, before I hand over to Mark, our links we're creating not just in publishing news articles, but also in writing Wikipedia articles, and writing scholarly articles, in writing blog posts. They're all subject to reference fraud, right? There's basically no way around this. The web is dynamic. We know that. We've known this for years and years and years. Now we have kind of the infrastructure, thanks to organizations such as the Internet Archive, to make copies of those, but just making a copy is simply not enough. We need to make machines understand that there is an archive copy, that we can make it actionable, and we can revert back to plan B if plan A fails, right? That's basically the whole point. And we're proposing to do this by decorating your links in order to make them, more robust. But of course, I'm not telling you a big secret here. This is a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? So we have the infrastructure, we have standard HTML. Now we just need to use this, right? So this is where organizations such as the Internet Archive, such as Wikipedia, name your news publishers, right, can really help to push this forward to make the web a more robust place. All right, so with this, I hand over to Mark, who has a little demo for you of Internet Archive services.
Thank you. Wow. Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, so let's see. I don't know what mode I'm in here now. All right, I'm going to get into Chrome and go over here. and go over there. Okay, cool. So, as Brewster was suggesting earlier this morning, this is a collaborative effort, and we're here to learn, to get ideas, and to problem solve together. And one of the problems that we've been working on, generally, it's kind of like a big theme here, at least among the web work that we do, is trying to help make the web more reliable. And so I think that link rot and content drift are key parts of that. So what are we doing about it, and where do we think we might go with it? Well, I mean, the first thing is it's obvious, but I should note at least that you have to archive things in order to be able to get them back later, and you have to archive them as close to the point that they're created, or at least referenced, if you want to be able to reference those creation points or those reference points. I'll get to that in a bit. So we also think that things have to be like really easy. They have to be obvious, and we're not there now today, right? So we're dealing in the mode of APIs and browser extensions and code and all the rest of that, and real humans don't use those kind of things. So I'll say we're at a big fail at that level, but it's okay because it's like a proof of concept that we can build from, and I'll show that in a bit. So let's take a specific use case where we've got some traction, and I think a domain that we might be able to see some movement in, Wikipedia. So the Internet Archive has been working with a couple of initially volunteers, now one is a consultant, engineers to address the issue of link rot on Wikipedias. There are 288 language Wikipedias. We've been working with about 30 of them so far. And over the last year, we've gone in and we've found and corrected 3.8 million broken links on these 30 language Wikipedias. This is a snapshot of the work that was done over the last month in terms of correcting. So this is robot, it's called IA-bot, that's going out there on Wikipedias and finding broken links, looking up references in the Wayback Machine, and also a whole slew of other web archives. We're not discriminating here. We'll take the references where we can get them. And then editing those links such that they'll point to an archive version, and is done in a way that the user can see what's happening. So the Wikipedia community has been happy about this. The Wikimedia Foundation has been happy about it. And every year, the Wikipedia community comes up with a wish, like they call it the community wish list of the 10 priorities that they would like the Wikimedia Foundation to help them support enacting. And last year, one of the 10 was to accelerate this work with IA-bot. And this year, one of the 10 was, instead of just being remedial about this work, can we be proactive? So what might that look like? Such that every time someone creates a URL to an external reference in Wikipedia, in real time, an archive would be made. Now we're doing that anyway, but through a different process. But that archive would be, that URL for that archive would be available in the visual editor in Wikipedia, and will be inserted into the article at the same time. So that brings us to robust links. So what could we do with that relative to robust links? So we basically, first I'll start by showing you some functionality of an extension that we built. We were able to get a couple of Google Summer of Code students this summer to help us work on advancing our extensions, our Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Edge Wayback Machine extensions. This is a particular version that's not available online, but has a piece of functionality in it that's kind of cool. I'm on a website and I want to get a robust link. I click, and there, I've got the code now to make a robust link. And if I put the magic code in the header of a web page, and then put this bit down here in the body, then I'll get something that looks like this. And I'm going to try to do this in real time. So /tilde mark G /rl.htm, and I get a page not found. Okay, I'm not sure why that's not working, but we can maybe do that later. anyway, what you're supposed to be seeing here is HTML. That'll do it. Okay, so this is a link with the robust link decoration. And I click on it, and then I'm able to go to the archive version or to the live version. So imagine this. Imagine if every single link to an external reference in every Wikipedia article had this kind of link associated with it. So that would do two key things, as Martin highlighted. One, obviously, it would deal with the fact that links are going bad by the thousands on Wikipedia every single day. And we don't have to wait until our robot discovers those broken links and fixes them. So it addresses the issue of link rot. Yay. Number two, maybe even more important than that, the content drift issue. So let me just, at the risk of being a little pedantic here, the web is not about stuff. The web is about addresses, right? So every time someone references an address, they're referencing whatever content was there at that moment and only that moment. There's no guarantee of what's there after the fact, right? So that's especially important in a service like Wikipedia, where it's all about referencing information. It's not referencing addresses. So we got this fundamental flaw in the way the web works, which is being precipitated in how people use the web in the land of Wikipedia. So we solve that problem too by taking a snapshot of the content associated with that URL at the moment someone references that URL in a Wikipedia article. Anyway, I'm working with the Wikimedia Foundation, the Wikipedia community, to move forward this idea, and hopefully next year we'll be able to report that, just like this year we can report we've corrected 3.8 million URLs. Next year I hope to be able to report that we've got some of these robust links populated throughout Wikipedia sites around the world. I just want to say one more little note, which is this, that, the technology is great, and the fact that, that Martin and others made all this cool stuff is fantastic, but I just want to, and it's not in a disparaging way at all, but just the reality is that the people aren't using these things. So I've just suggested one particular way that we might be able to get some wide-scale adoption of this use, but I just want to put it out to everyone here. There's a lot of smart people working on some creative solutions to, like, what kind of ideas might you have about other ways that we could help to make the web more reliable and therefore more useful, especially embellishing and extending on the idea of robust links. So, thank you. Okay, a couple minutes of questions or comments or solutions.
So thinking from the publisher point of view, they come up with the URL that's on a topic. They want to preserve that URL. There are corrections and there are additions to the story, which isn't too far from somebody coding. They might have a patch. They might have a feature addition. And then there's a commit at a certain point, and even versioning and things like that. Do these decorated URLs have the ability to say, oh, this is a file modification time? And maybe even a little descriptive note like you do when you're committing. And does, when you ping the archive saying, here's a new one, do you get something back with a new URL?
Right, so I would put those in the category of application specific, right? So there's, from the technology point of view, there's nothing in the way that prevents you from doing this sort of things, enhancing links with even more information, metadata that is meaningful to you, to your publishing platform. I would say as long as you don't break interoperability by making this inaccessible or inactionable for other machines, as long as you don't break standards, especially you can ingest all sorts of information there. Right? Earlier we talked about content-based hashes as well. There's nothing that keeps you from doing that as long as you stick with basically HTML standards, right? But it would be, again, I would caution, because it's application specific, right? It means something to you, to your publishing platform. To publisher B over there, it may not mean anything. I'm not sure I'm following your question. Do you mind? Yeah. There's a mic behind you. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the natural evolution of the writing process in a story, and not necessarily, What if can you communicate the process to the archive, and the archive also retains knowledge that this was a publisher-intended file modification, a new version with maybe a little comment in what's new. We added this feature.
So, and Mark may correct me there, but as of right now, archives work on the basis of a URI and the date time, right? A date stamp. What sort of change you did to the content that is dereferenced if you dereference the URI, that's agnostic to the archiving process, right? There are content management systems that automatically create a new version whenever you edit the article. Wikipedia is a good example for this. Or you have your generic URI that identifies, an article, and whatever change you do there, that's basically agnostic to the archive. There is deduplication, of course, going on. Right? If the archive tries to make a copy of your page again and sees, okay, there's no significant changes, we don't even bother. We just say, okay, this is the same as we've seen before. That's possible too. But in terms of telling the archive what has changed, that seems like a more elaborate process. I don't think we have any standardized process in place right now for that. Right, yeah.
Edward? Do we have time?
All right.
I'll be quick.
We'll talk later. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin and Mark, for this fantastic presentation. In terms of solutions, have you thought about talking to, or have you talked to the Modern Language Association, APA, AMA, okay, about putting this as a standard, not just date accessed, but a robust link, date accessed, here's the archive version?
Right. So personally, I have not. I've worked with students in the past that tried to implement something like this on a departmental level at a large research university on the West Coast, and she's gotten nowhere. So she did graduate, but beyond that. So it's a chicken and egg catch-22 sort of a problem, right? We've got to start somewhere, and I do see the point of educating the educators, right? Because if we all tell our PhD students, do this, otherwise you do not graduate, right? We have leverage at that point, so might as well, yeah. So I see a big stop sign. Can we take this offline, maybe? Sure. All right.
Thank you. I had a question about one of the elements in the robust link, which was specific. I have a question about the robust links. The first element, which is create a snapshot of reference content in a public web archive. Given that so many scientific papers are pointing to reference content that resides in a paywalled publisher site, and they may not have the ability to make a web archive version of that said content. Mm-hmm. How do you get around that problem, I wonder?
Right. Yeah. So what robust links is designed to do is address the notion of linking to what I called in my earlier slides web at large resources. So those are your blog post, your video, your Wikipedia article. Those are not other scholarly articles that are paywalled by Elsevier and the like, right? So basically, think of it maybe as resources that are not necessarily subject to the whole PID, persistent identifier sort of movement. They have just URIs, right, and nothing else. Yeah, right. All right, thank you.
Sorry, somebody's got to crack the whip up here. Next presenter, Art Pasquinelli, is the LOCKSS Partnership Manager for the Stanford University Libraries. He's responsible for outreach and marketing of LOCKSS, which means it's an acronym. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. Preservation and data security technology to the library, archive, research museum, web archiving, and government communities. He helps establish new LOCKSS community networks and works with existing LOCKSS networks. He has a BA in history from UC Davis and an MA in international affairs and science and technology from George Washington University. He's going to be telling us how to have permanent access to journalism, which is what we're about. We get out of this. Let's see. I believe that will do it.
Well, better lower this. Hello, everybody. I've been with the LOCKS program for about 3 months now, and it is an open source community. So I want to be talking a lot about community here, not just technology. I'll go back and forth between the two, but I do know some of our LOCKS networks are actually here for public docs and meta archive. So there's a lot of people here to talk about LOCKS. Again, the acronym is Locks of Copies Keep Stuff Safe. Okay, it is not what I would call leading edge in that it has a long history going into the 1990s of established technology. We are revamping that right now, and I'll get into a little bit of that, and then we can have one-on-one discussions if we don't have time for questions. Can you hear me? Okay. So, today's environment, LOCKS background and status, product features and directions. We are re-architecting the product, and we'll go into some use cases and the roadmap that we're looking at. If you look at today's environment, you know, active preservation and security are essential. Things are very dangerous right now for internet content. And then you have disintermediation and fracturing. The way I see that is even the major networks today, they're all fighting one another. People listen to what channel they want. Anybody can publish anything, and anybody can read anything. I see that with my 12-year-old quite a bit. Fragile content and context of content. This has been an ongoing problem since my days at Sun Microsystems. You know, you have your website, but what was the context if you have the article of that content that was written? Data journalism, Regina's going to be following up after me, but that is a very big growing area that I think we all need to start looking at, but a lot of people don't totally understand right now, but there are data sets that need to be protected more than ever. There are malicious players out there, and we're reading the news every day about all kinds of bad things that have happened in the social media environment. And then you have the internet, which is evolving, and there's an interplay I've noticed over the last few years between you have a social advancement on the internet, and then a technology answer to it, and vice versa. So, you know, that came out. I saw, I don't know if the local people saw it, but there was an article in the Mercury about some UC Berkeley students that got a web browser set up to detect fake news. So the background to LOCKS, it was started by a librarian and a data scientist, Dave Rosenthal and Vicky Reich, in the 1990s. And it was originally focused on journal articles and preserving those journal articles, a lot around post-access, you know, and they basically set this up and then established LOCKS networks all over the world. I'll get into those, but again, this has been around for quite a long time. We're going to be talking mainly about preservation. But preservation is an active community effort. I've been in the preservation community since 2007, really dealing a lot with it. And a lot of people think you just throw a copy off and it's preserved. And that still is, not in this group, but around universities, that is still a big idea that permeates the campuses. Lots of communities keep stuff safe. I didn't say copies here, I said communities, because then you start getting wrapped up in the whole idea of preserving your community, your open source community, which is a big effort that Catherine and I have been involved in, discussing how do you keep a robust community together financially and intellectually. Enabling, preserving your content. The thing about LOCKS is you just don't want another bit bucket. LOCKS allows a community that has a topical interest, a geographic interest, or just wants to get something done. It allows them to keep their control and reform their community as they want it. Okay, and I'll get into that. And it enables libraries to really be digital libraries. If you look at open source, I think this is a great list that pretty much goes over all the reasons why you want to do open source. It complements digital preservation, because all the stuff we're talking about around the web is inherently built for this type of preservation. You want to get into an avoidance of lock-in with a vendor, and we have seen that, especially in the publishing area. So you want to avoid your lock-ins. You want to make sure the community is putting in new advancements into the technology and that those are freely available. You want to be able to move the data. There's some good points. You want the data close to you, but you also want to have it portable and reusable. You want open standards, and even the third-party vendors that are developing preservation software today are adhering to open standards. So that's one of the things I've seen over the last 10 years or so that's changed in the industry. We want to collaborate. You want to keep your security very tight, and you also want to empower your adopter. At Sun Microsystems, one of the things we used to say is there are more creative people outside of Sun Microsystems than inside of Sun Microsystems. So you want to enable your adopter community to make enhancements. That's one of the things we're going through with LOCKSS right now. As we're revamping LOCKSS, we're going to our developer community and practitioner community for advice. So getting into LOCKSS a little bit on the technology side, long-term bit integrity is very tough. I dealt a lot in the tape environment. And yes, you do have bit rot. You cannot put content somewhere and just assume it will stay fine. That better? There is bit rot, so you are going to lose data. So you constantly have to formally check that data. More copies doesn't mean more safety. I dealt in infrastructure for a long time. Many people have, say, NetApp farms of disk. Well, when you have a virus or you have bad data, all you do is replicate it. And I saw lots of people coming in my private sector days saying, oh, we have all these copies. Well, they're copies. They're not the actual content, and they're copied. So whatever happened, they may have 8 copies of useless data, okay, that carry viruses and mistakes in them. So you want to be able to check and correlate the content. Don't underestimate people making mistakes. Everything we ever saw with disk and tape, both, all the mistakes that were done to the data were done in the migration, and it was usually a human error that caused a lot of the problem. Watch your attacks on information, and again, in preservation, what I mentioned before, you have to look at the organizational health that content is kept in. The whole idea of LOCKSS is around decentralized community copies. So no one has a monopoly on copy making. You need to have multiple copies. We suggest you have at least 6 copies of content, hopefully 7, possibly 8. So you're double checking all the different copies in the different nodes of a LOCKSS network. They're decorrelated, so everything is independent. They're not just copies, they're being checked all the time. Okay, so the way the checking works is it'll go in and slowly analyze the data and thoroughly go through the data so you are totally sure of what you have. If one of the nodes has an inconsistency, it checks the other nodes to bring it up and make it consistent with the other ones. The most important thing, it's a community focus, so there's a lot of control by the community, and that seems to be the overall thrust of every one of our LOCKSS networks is they want the control over how they use their data, where they put their data, and how much data they want to put in. How they want to grow is another issue. So the strength of the LOCKSS network, there's a group at Stanford that does development, but the LOCKSS networks that we have are really the strength of the whole program. We have MetaArchive. MetaArchive has set up hubs. They can take any type of content. They work globally. Catherine? Oh. Catherine's here, and they've done a great job setting up these hubs, pulling in affiliates. And you don't always have to be on a hub, but you can be connected to one. They've really shown the way. We have government docs here. James Jacobs is here. So we work very closely with GPO, maintaining government content. We just brought on PermaCC, which was mentioned before, so that's now a LOCKSS network that we have brought up. We will be revamping the content. Web services and a web services development stack are very important so that we can share that with our community, and that's where we're going. We heard that. It's also more in tune to what's going on with people do want to use the cloud. So we're starting to work on web services, microservices, RESTful APIs. This has been track certified, which is, I think, important. People are looking at capabilities around trusted digital repositories, and I think it is important to have those standards in place that you can adhere to. LOCKSS has done that for some of its programs. Getting into the products and features. Last year, well, we put the press release out. At the beginning of this year, we got a grant from the Mellon Foundation to decomponentize, to break apart our Java code that's been quite old. Okay, so there's been a group working on it, but it hasn't been really totally redeveloped. That's what they're doing now. We're taking two major components, one which is the automatic data, metadata extraction. The other is the polling repair capability that checks the different the nodes in the network. So we're taking those, we're going to componentize those, but also other capabilities within LOCKSS. So everything will be a component. When we extend that, it's going to be up to our community of developers in the different LOCKSS networks to really tell us how we're going to reuse this, because this is all open and new to us. We're breaking our existing model. The reason we're doing it, we're reducing the operational costs. We're de-siloing everything, so we're making these open components. That's what we've been talking about this morning. That's what everybody is looking for. You can evolve into the new web service technologies. That's very important because we have seen, talking to some of our LOCKSS networks, the development stacks seem very similar when you talk to people. And now I think we'll be able to expand and add new features on top of the core LOCKSS technology. And we want new partners, and we want new partners really helping us to develop. What the polling and repair does, it goes out, it polls, and it does it at the bit level and checks all the nodes. The main thing to remember about this, it can detect tampering. It assumes untrustworthiness on the part of the nodes. So when someone gets in or there's a problem, it assumes that there would be a problem. It is not just like, okay, we're just checking, it's all trusted. Okay, so it does have tamper-resistant, tamper-evident features built into it. Use cases, again, to work with different communities that want to control what they're doing. It could be geographic. We have state ones, we have European Union ones. Not everybody wants their data in the US, not everybody wants their data in the cloud. People do want to protect the data that they have developed close to them too. We would like to support very back end, so right now we're looking much more at the disk to tape tiered architectures, which we've been very successful in. This can run on any type of on-prem hardware. It can run on a virtual machine. But now we're looking and doing sizing and cost estimates for cloud, and we will be looking at the different cloud vendors in the next 2 to 3 months. Functionality, this can take any type of content. If you can bag it, you can use it in LOCKSS, but it will take FTP files, it will take web harvesting materials, so it can take basically any data you would get from a journal or an open repository. retrievable, downloadable metadata from expected URL patterns. You can actually do some predictive analysis from the metadata module that we do have. And that'll be one of the areas we'll really be exploring a lot more with users as we open this up and push it into the community over the next few months. Use cases, I think for the librarians here, this would be probably one of the areas of most exciting. You can apply to consistent subsets of content in your bigger works, in your corpora. A lot of curation capabilities within crawls. You can pull out mini crawl information. You can retrieve publications posted online if the licensing allows it. So there's a lot of things built in to allow digital librarians more use cases. On the roadmap, a lot of what we're doing now will be to create an ecosystem. And again, Mellon funded us to extend this out in an open community format. So we'll be going out, Digital Preservation Network, DPN, they do preservation, but if they can use part of this component, we'll give them, whatever they need. We will also go in and start working with partners. We've partnered with Archivit in the past to optimize things, but we will be looking at different organizations that do repository content. And, I look at my job as building up an ecosystem, because I knew from my private sector days, you don't sell a product, you sell the product with the offering around it to make it easy to use, to have partners, to have collaborations, to get information and documentation is very needed. And we'll be, again, I think I have to compliment the Internet Archive for all the great work they've done, but we'll be looking at Open Wayback, and we have a good relationship with Archivit on web archiving. Looking ahead, I mentioned it before, but we will look at the economics and the technical aspects of putting VMs up in the virtual machines, up in the different cloud vendors, testing those, optimizing those, making that an option for people who may want one or two hubs or their nodes in the cloud, and then the rest on-prem. So you have an option. I think it's also, we're pushing the community of vendors in that cloud area to actually give us some good information. It's been very hard to correlate what they all offer, and I think a lot of people are very interested in doing that, and we have all the LOCKSS networks behind us there. In early 2018, I'll focus on early 2018, over the next 6 months, we will do Docker containerization, we will do a Web Harvest framework, and we will do polling and repair service. So those may be the main ones we want out. The future stuff is a year away, still nebulous, but those will be 3 areas we will be focusing on. So I'll put it out to you while I'm here. I'll be here both days. What potential do you see? I've seen preservation brought up in several of the conversations before. I've seen control brought up, flexibility brought up, but I do think this is unique in that I believe in communities managing their own futures and their methodologies, their governance structures, their technical infrastructure. And I often see some of the things that have been developed are top-down. So when you can get into something like a LOCKSS network that already exists, like a Meta Archive or a PermaCC, I think it's a big opportunity to either go into an existing community or set your own up, depending on what you and your other co-workers want to do. So, can you see where I work? Okay, I'm cut off. But if anybody comes down to Stanford, call me. I'll give you a tour. You'll see a lot of Beat Cal signs up there right now. Sorry, Steve. And then lastly, there's a lot of content up about repositories and where to go for information. These are probably the 4 areas over the years that I have gone to. So I just wanted to put a resource page up so you have it, just strictly on preservation. So I don't know if we have time for questions. I don't want to take away from Regina. So I guess I have 2 minutes.
Is this a good moment to maybe throw out the question, which may be better brought up later in the day? How does the European drift now toward the right to forget interact with your efforts and other people's? And if it's not fully, it's probably a very vast question. One of the lawyers and I were talking about it at breakfast. Where does this fit in, and what power might they have to overturn some of your attempts to preserve things?
That's interesting.
People hear my question? Yeah, thank you. The right to be forgotten, which is coming out of Germany and France, right?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I'm not deep in it, but what I've read is it's coming out. But I have to say, that's the thing I like about a LOCKSS network. It can be locally driven. So within those governance, within those trends that are occurring, you know, they could put a governance structure that, yes, we'll have, depending on what they want to do, this is totally flexible. You can delete what you want. How it gets in, I'd have to talk offline how it gets in with the individual privacy rights. Because, you know, in Europe, the privacy, especially in Germany and France, the privacy concerns are much more, have much more weight than we Americans put on them, honestly. In dealing with cloud and dealing with storage in Europe, they really are concerned about privacy and people being able to go in and track content. So we can talk about that. But again, the flexibility of having maybe a Dutch LOCKSS network with its own governance structure, or a German one. That's why I say I like having preservation, but I also like it being controlled locally. So I don't know if that answered your question totally, but we can discuss it.
It's also worth mentioning the darkness of most of the private networks.
Go ahead and comment.
It's also worth just noting quickly that most of the private LOCKSS networks right now are dark archives, and that doesn't get around the need to address that problem, because obviously if you're preserving it because you hope somebody will have access someday. But it does take away some of the immediacy of concern. And so regardless of whether it's a national model or international model or, you know, statewide model or whatever, there are ways to address that in a dark archive that don't require you to be immediate about the addressing, maybe.
But, you know, yeah, to hit on that, to build on that, I've been in the Preservation Archive special interest group for years, and I've always said it's about permanent access. So you always think something's dark until the government wants it. So I like to talk to you more about it. Maybe we can get together and talk. But yeah, these are all dark archives that in the LOCKSS network. And I went over, I think. Okay. I don't want to take. I'd be in trouble if I took time away from my coworker.
Yes, we have another Stanford personality here, so we'll be respectful. Regina Lee Roberts is a collection development librarian at Stanford University Libraries in the Humanities and Social Sciences. She is currently working with colleagues to develop methods and sustainable ways of archiving and preserving data collected by researchers and journalists in support of evidence-based research and reporting. Title of your talk, Archiving Computational Journalism Data.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Ed, for hosting this event and the Internet Archive as well. It's a great pleasure to be here. Let me get this slideshow going. Oops, went too fast. Oh, okay. That's what that does. I want to read my notes, but I want you to see what's happening here. Is there some way to switch over. All right. Okay. That's fine, too. Oh, no, that's okay. This is fine as well. The notes. Here we go. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so as Ed mentioned, I'm a collection development librarian. I cover anthropology, archaeology, communication and journalism, feminist studies, and Lusophone Africa. So as part of a team of librarians, let's see if I can, sorry. Having difficulty with this machine here. Who work on collection development. One of the areas that we find in the social sciences is that researchers want to use data. They want to use big data. And so we're looking at collecting data. And in social sciences, a lot of researchers use government data. And journalists are great data liberators. And they do that through making rigorous public records requests, FOIA requests, and once they get that data, where does it go? It sits maybe on their hard drive or at their news organization, and if the data can be shared, which typically it should be if it's a public record request. There are some issues. We could talk about that a little bit later. But those would be the kinds of content that I want to try to collect for future researchers, for tomorrow's researchers, for researchers 10, 20 years from now, 100, 200 years from now, so that they could have the data to verify the facts, to check, to find out what was running when a news organization has an app on their website that shows some data visualization. Well, it's pulling from some data set, most likely, so it would be nice to know what that data is and be able to replicate that somehow. So my intention is to try to capture as much of that data as possible and put it into the tools that we have available. And right now, that's the SDR, the Stanford Digital Repository. Oops, there we go. Good. And so the digital repository at Stanford is like a lot of institutional repositories. It is made to be agnostic of format so that we could capture data, born digital objects that our professors create, our grad students create, and it doesn't have all of the bells and whistles that a social science data archive would require, like of a high standard like ICPSR or UK Data Archive has got a really high standard. They're using DDI, Alliance, metadata, and they have a whole discovery layer that allows people to enter the code books of the data, so about the data. What we have at Stanford right now is the SDR, and so we're using that and trying to see how we could develop it further, how we could tweak it, how we could get the user interface to do some, include some of the functionality. But in order to make that happen, we have to start somewhere. So we're starting with collecting data that we can, and preserving it in the SDR with the preservation layer with the locks that Art was just speaking about. So I'm here to just show like an example of a collection that we just finished processing over the summer and getting into the archive through working with our faculty in the journalism department and the computer science department. So this is a snapshot of what it looks like in the SDR. The files are there, and they're not in, you can't really sort through them. You can't really, you just have to download them to see what's in them. There's a README file, that's the code book. But what I'd like to have is a more robust metadata about that. But anyway, this is what we're starting off with. And just a note about the SDR, the Stanford Digital Repository, is that it's very exciting that we have this. We didn't have it in 2010. And so for me, it's exciting that we have this opportunity and that we have an opportunity to collect the research data there, make it reusable for future researchers, for different types of analysis than what it was maybe originally collected for comparison with other data that's brought in, maybe even on the same topic. So let me just dive into a little bit about working with data journalists. So data journalists are great data liberators, and I mentioned that before, right? They are persistent and they're expert at getting the public data. It's the nature of their job. It's very important for us as a democratic society. And one of the reasons why I became a librarian is because I believe very strongly in intellectual freedom and the freedom to read. And if our researchers at Stanford are reading through using tools like R and Python and scraping the web, then I want, and bringing in data and using big data sets and using tools to read that, then I want to provide those reading materials for them. So it's a different way of reading when you're using data, but it's still a form of reading, it's a form of analysis, it's a form of intellectual freedom. And making those data sets possible and preserved, not just archived. So a lot of data journalists will put their data set in GitHub, and that's a great source. And we're looking into like how can we create an API that would pull that data, those data into the SDR with permissions, of course. And then just because we know that in GitHub it's like a platform that people are using to share their data, but at the same time, when their project is done or they are moving on and they need more space, well, what, they take that down, perhaps? We don't know. It's not as persistent as something that is created just to be persistent. I've been inspired by James Hamilton's book, Democracy's Detectives, and it talks a lot about computational journalism and the growth of that, and how that in the news industry and in news organizations, using computational journalism is a way of saving some money and continuing that hardcore investigative journalism element that is the watchdog for us as a democratic society, a watchdog for the government, against the government, and for private sector that might be doing things that we don't know about. And if there are not people who are looking into different matters and asking questions and requesting that information and creating these data sets that they are writing their stories from, then we are in the dark. So it's also so as a librarian, that's part of what I'm trying to do here. Okay, So let's go. I'm just going to skip to the next one. So this, in the conversations with my faculty and with and attending the investigative reporters and editors conferences and talking to journalists about their data, so a lot of folks have said, well, it would be great to have data that is gathered from state and local agencies and aggregated up to a national level that can give us a picture of what certain topics look like at Snapshot in time, or if we can just kind of build this big local data idea. So with that in mind, I've got this image here of just some of the ways in which the SDR is kind of conceptually for me. We've got the depositor layer, which is self-deposit, and so then we're relying on the depositor to create the metadata for the objects that are placed there. We've got the preservation layer, that's the locks and the geolocations to protect the data and create the multiple copies. And that requires us another set of metadata that can talk to the metadata that's in the depositor layer. And then what we need to build out a little bit more is the distribution specifics. Like, for example, with data, sometimes there might be some sensitive data, or there might be some data user agreement that the next person who downloads that data needs to agree to, following those guidelines in an ethical manner. And that's a little bit different than just throwing it out there. Like, sometimes we will have to have a data use agreement that people can, the depositor can say, well, you know, I don't want anyone to recreate a database from this and sell it, or use it to do something malicious. So there are some ethical concerns, and a layer of that I'd like to see developed out in the way we are disseminating the data through our system. And there are some other repositories have some of that, like Dataverse will have some of that, and there are some other proprietary companies that do that as well. And we're looking into an open source type that would be CCAN might be another option, and that would include a discovery layer. And so that is, in this case of the sample that I'm going to show you, is what we've done is, instead of serving out the data through our catalog, which is called SearchWorks, we've just linked to the website that the researchers created about their project. And what I would like to see is a way to do that from the library's interface, from our user interface as well, so that so right now what we're doing is web archiving the web page of the data set, which you're about to see, and then it would be really nice to have it also in a way that, if they came to the SearchWorks, or if they found it through our links, through the SDR and through Stanford, they would also see the full metadata and the full discovery layer and indexing. So, so now I'm going to show you the first aggregated data set that we have added to the SDR, and it's the Stanford Open Policing Project. Again, it's been aggregated up from local sources to a national level. The data was collected by data journalists from 2011 to 2015. Not all the states provided the data. Some of the data was incomplete or didn't have certain demographic information that was useful to the researchers, so they ended up analyzing a smaller portion of what's there, but all the files that they received are now in the SDR, and it's a project that was started by Cheryl Phillips, a Stanford faculty member and a journalist from the Seattle Times, and then also Sharad Goyal from computer science and their students in the journalism program. And so what they have now, the findings, and I'll just read this off to you. The findings are of the 20 states that had data that was robust enough to analyze and that they could standardize so that they could accurately analyze it. And this was police stop data. So what they did was they collected the police stop data from local levels, from city police and state patrols, and what they found, out of 60 million stops, they found that they looked at the stop rates by race, so they were looking at the demographics of the people who were stopped, and by race, then they looked at when they were stopped, how often were they searched. And then, based on how often were they searched, how often did the police officer find contraband, like a gun or drugs. And they found that at the point of stop and search, they found that Black and Hispanic folks were searched more often than white, but that when white folks were searched, the percentage of time that contraband was found was higher. And so that looks like bias. And they applied a few other tests to see if that was true, and the threshold test was one of those tests to see if the bias, it was really a true bias, and they found that it is. And so this data is now out there for other journalists to use at their state if they want to look at just their state, or if they want to write another story from that data, or if people want to analyze it further and look and test it out and verify that they did everything that they could to find this. And then it's now in the Stanford Digital Repository and available for folks. And these are the researchers who worked on this project, who collected the data, who cleaned the data, who standardized the data, who analyzed it, who uploaded it into the SDR and provided us with the metadata. And so it's a very big process, but it's very important, and I think that it's an area that I'm going to continue collecting on, and hopefully other institutional repositories and other repositories will do the same. And I think one thing that came out of last year's Dodging the Memory Hole was that the IRE data repository suggested that they wanted to create a data registry. And so that's another way that we can find out where these types of data live, and if we can combine them, and if they can be standardized and used for analysis. So while I've been talking, I've talked about some of the features that I would add to the SDR to make it more elegant and more social science standard for social science research. And so that's kind of listed here. I'd ask for more robust metadata all along the way. But I know that once I've talked, all of the journalists that I've spoken to, they're like, once I'm done with a story and I'm done with that data, I move on to the next. So they're not going to want to spend a lot of time doing the deposit and the metadata. So we have to figure out ways, and so APIs and other curatorial things that we have to kind of build into our workflow. Okay, my time's up. But I think I've made all points that I had intended to. And so if anyone has questions, I welcome them. And I will pull up the website too for the Stanford Open Policing data if that's of interest to anyone. questions? No. Okay. Oh, yes. Hi.
Thank you. On a previous slide, you had a reference to what looked like maybe a preprint or a journal article in the works. Can you bring that back, or is that available somewhere?
Yes, it's actually available through the Stanford Open Policing website, which I'm going to pull up right now. But that's their research paper on their findings, and it talks all about the way they standardized and cleaned the data and analyzed the data. Yeah. So let me see if I can get to that. Here. So one of the things we did in our catalog, instead of what I would like to do is have like a robust user interface that had all these kind of bells and whistles and customizable in the way that this website is. So, but what we ended up doing, because they wanted to have data, people sign off on the data use agreement. We, even though the files are all in the SDR and they can be found through the Perl, what they've done is linked the data files to the SDR in their website. And let's see, I think the citation is here. Yeah, to the working paper. The other thing they've done in their website is to show other publications that have come out of, or that have talk about this data set, or if other publications come out using it, they will post a citation here as well. So that would be another thing that I would want in our user interface, is like the way to include those citations of who used this data and how did they use it, and here's their publication. Anything else? Thank you.
Thanks, Regina. One thing I haven't mentioned, and if you haven't discovered it, we have cleverly tucked a printed program into your badge holder. It's just a little thing, but it's quite handy. Thanks. Good design. I won't take credit for it, but I will take credit for hiring the. You've done it twice now. Yeah. Well, I take credit for I worked with the right people to make that happen. It is about lunchtime. We will come back in about an hour. 1:15 we'll reconvene. There will be, I think, in your lunch box or lunch bags, there'll be a slip of paper with your assignment, the work that you have to do to earn, comply with what we have to comply with the rules. There also will be, during lunch, there'll be some sign-up sheets for the lunch spots tomorrow. We've gotten together and made some reservations. Lunch is on your own tomorrow, so look for those sheets, and you can sign up, get your name on for the reservation so that we can get you to lunch tomorrow. And I think that's it. We'll be back at 1:15. The lunches are downstairs, right? Mark, you know.
Yeah, great, thanks. Lunch is going to be downstairs in the Sunday school room. And so you're going to get like a little, a glimpse into a tradition here at the Internet Archive. Every Friday we have an open lunch. And it's open to our staff and it's open to the community. If you ever want to come back here and experience more of the Internet Archive, just let us know ahead of time. Send email to info@archive.org, and we'll make sure we reserve enough food. So once again, it's going to be downstairs in the Sunday school. There's two ways you can get there. One is you can go out the doors in the back here and then go down back in this direction, and in one of there's a door that will show you out there. The other way is you can go out this door right here and carefully use the railing, go down the stairs, and that's kind of the back way. So it's a little shorter. And so just one more thing. Someone's asked me about these statues. Anyone wonder about them? Kind of interesting, creepy, whatever. So here's the deal. If you've worked here for 3 years or more, you get a statue. Brewster had been to China and seen the terracotta soldiers and had this idea, this inspiration. So, because we're a nonprofit, remember I said that earlier, we're really frugal, we don't get any stock options, but you stick around, you do some work, you put in your dues, you get a statue. The statues are getting better. So Tracy LaQuay Parker, she's our senior engineer here. She actually built an augmented reality app just in the last few days for iOS, where you go up to these statues and through basically statue facial recognition, the person is identified, and then some metadata about that person comes up on the screen. So I think that may be the shape of things to come. So if you have any ideas about where we can take that particular idea, I'd love to hear those as well. So once again, please join us downstairs in the Sunday school. You see what we call it that, for a glimpse of our traditional Friday afternoon lunch here at the Internet Archive. Thank you.